You are in the middle of a conversation with your co-parent, and something unexpected comes up: a schedule change, a financial request, a decision that affects the kids, and before you have had time to really think, words are already coming out of your mouth. Maybe you agree to something you did not mean to agree to. Maybe you push back harder than you intended. Either way, the conversation ends, and you are left with a quiet, unsettled feeling that something just went wrong, and you are not entirely sure how to fix it. There is a specific reason this keeps happening, and it has less to do with what was said and more to do with when you responded. This video is about why negotiating on the spot is one of the most costly habits in co-parenting, what is actually happening in the moment you feel that pressure, and what a more deliberate approach looks like in real life. Co-parenting involves a continuous stream of small negotiations: pickup times, holiday schedules, unexpected expenses, school decisions. These conversations happen constantly, and many of them happen without any warning. Someone sends a message. Someone calls. Someone raises something at drop-off. And there is often an unspoken pressure, sometimes real, sometimes imagined, to respond immediately, as though hesitation itself is a form of conflict. The pattern tends to look like this. A request is made, you feel the weight of the moment, and your mind races to arrive at the right answer before the silence stretches too long. So you respond. You say yes when you meant to think about it first. You say no defensively when you might have found a reasonable middle ground, or you agree to something in the moment and spend the next 3 days quietly trying to walk it back. This is not a failure of communication. It is a predictable response to perceived pressure, and most people never fully recognize the pattern for what it is until they have repeated it enough times to see the cost. Here is where things become more interesting. When you are put on the spot, your brain does not shift into problem-solving mode. It shifts into threat response mode. The pressure of an expected immediate response activates the same stress system your brain uses to handle physical danger. Your thinking narrows. Your available options seem fewer than they actually are, and your nervous system pushes you toward the fastest resolution, not the best one. Psychologists refer to this as reactive decision-making, when perceived urgency overrides deliberate thought. The brain prioritizes speed, and in doing so, it sacrifices accuracy. In co-parenting specifically, this effect is compounded by history. If there is any unresolved tension, ongoing distrust, or a pattern of difficult exchanges in the relationship, even a neutral request can land with unexpected emotional weight. So, when your co-parent raises something unexpected, your brain is not simply processing the request, it is simultaneously processing the relationship, past patterns, perceived intentions, and how you want to come across in this particular moment. That is a significant cognitive load to carry in real time, and it reliably degrades the quality of the decisions that follow. What this looks like in real life is something like this. Your co-parent calls and says they need to swap weekends, and, without thinking it through, you say yes even though you already had plans. Later, you feel resentful. Not because the swap was unreasonable, but because you never gave yourself the space to actually decide. Or the opposite happens. You say no immediately, out of a protective reflex, and later you realize the request was perfectly manageable. Now there is unnecessary friction that a pause would have entirely avoided. Both of these outcomes come from the same source: responding before you were ready. There is also something worth naming here, which researchers call reactive agreement, saying yes not because you genuinely want to, but because saying no in the moment feels harder than going along. This is particularly common in relationships where there is a history of conflict, or where one person has learned to manage tension by accommodating rather than by deciding. The path of least resistance in the short term creates the most resistance over time. Each reactive agreement sets a precedent. Each impulsive refusal builds a wall. And slowly, the co-parenting dynamic becomes shaped by patterns that neither person consciously chose. Put simply, when you respond before you are ready, you are letting the moment make the decision for you. The first and most important shift is straightforward. Give yourself permission to pause before you respond. This sounds simple. In practice, it requires real intention, because most of us have been quietly conditioned to treat silence as something to fill and to treat delay as a sign of weakness or avoidance. It is neither. The pause is a positioning strategy, and it is one of the most effective tools available in co-parenting communication. A short, clear phrase is all it takes to create that space without creating conflict. Something like, "Let me check my calendar and get back to you by tomorrow." Or, "I want to give this proper thought. I'll have an answer for you tonight." These phrases do three things simultaneously. They buy you the time you need to think clearly. They signal that you are taking the conversation seriously, and they prevent the reactive decisions that tend to create longer-term problems. The second strategy is to separate receiving information from responding to it. When a co-parent raises something unexpected, your first role is simply to understand what is being asked, not to solve it immediately. You can fully acknowledge a request without committing to an answer. "I hear you. I'll think about that," and follow up is a complete and appropriate response in the moment, and it closes no doors. Here's why that distinction matters. When you separate receiving from responding, you give yourself the opportunity to think without the noise of a live interaction narrowing your options. You can consider your actual schedule, your children's needs, your own limits, and any practical constraints, all without the pressure of someone waiting on the other end of the line. A third strategy involves using written communication as the default for anything significant. Text and email give both parties time to process before they respond. They create a record that removes ambiguity later, and they allow you to draft, review, and choose your words deliberately before they are sent, something that a phone call or a face-to-face conversation simply cannot offer. This is not about avoiding verbal communication. It is about being intentional about which conversations happen in which format and why. For anything involving schedules, finances, agreements, or decisions with a long-term impact on your children, written communication reduces the risk of reactive decision-making substantially. A fourth layer to consider is learning to recognize your own reactivity triggers. Most people have specific topics or specific ways things are raised that reliably activate their stress response. For some, it is last-minute requests. For others, it is a particular tone. For others still, it is requests that feel like they are disrupting something they worked hard to establish. When you know what tends to activate you, you can name it to yourself in the moment, quietly, internally, and apply the pause strategy before reacting. Awareness is the gap between the trigger and the response. That gap is exactly where better decisions live. You may have experienced one of these moments yourself. Let's look at 3 scenarios to see how this plays out in practice. The first, it is Thursday evening and your co-parent texts asking to swap weekends because of a work commitment. You already had family plans for that weekend. Your first instinct is to say no. Instead of sending that immediate reply, you respond with, "Let me look at my schedule and I'll get back to you tomorrow morning." You take the evening. You realize the family visit can shift by a week without much difficulty. You agree to the swap, and also let your co-parent know that future swap requests work better with more advance notice. The outcome is a resolution that works for everyone, and a quiet step toward a more structured communication pattern going forward. The second scenario, you are at drop-off and your co-parent brings up a financial request for a school activity. You have no context. You do not know the cost, the timeline, or the details. You can feel the pressure of an immediate answer because the children are standing right there, and the last thing you want is tension in that moment. Instead of agreeing to something you do not yet understand, you say, "Send me the details and I'll look at it tonight." Simple and clear. You are not refusing. You are not agreeing to something uninformed. You have simply moved the conversation to a better environment for decision-making. The third, your co-parent calls and raises a recurring disagreement, something about school nights and scheduling that has come up before. The conversation begins to escalate slightly. You feel the pull to say the definitive thing that settles it once and for all. This is the moment that most often produces regret. Instead of pushing for a resolution under pressure, you say, "I think we both want to get this right for the kids. Let's come back to this when we've both had time to think it through." You end the call. You have not avoided the issue. You have chosen a better moment to address it, one where the decision comes from clarity rather than from stress. There is a broader principle underneath all of this. In any negotiation, whether in business, in relationships, or in co-parenting, the person who responds without thinking is operating at a disadvantage, not because they are less capable, but because reactive thinking is genuinely less accurate than deliberate thinking. The research on this is consistent. Decisions made under pressure are faster but more error-prone, more emotionally influenced, and harder to walk back later. And here is where the situation becomes counterintuitive. Many parents feel that pausing will create tension, that asking for time signals hesitation or unwillingness to cooperate. The opposite tends to be true. When you consistently respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, you build something important in the co-parenting relationship: credibility. Your co-parent learns that when you agree to something, you mean it. When you raise a concern, it has been considered. When you ask for time, you actually use it. That kind of steadiness, built over consistent interactions, reduces conflict more than any single negotiation ever could. It also models something meaningful for your children, that measured responses are more valuable than immediate ones, and that taking time to think is a sign of care, not avoidance. Every time you pause before responding, you are making a choice. You are choosing the quality of your decision over the appearance of decisiveness. And over time, that choice becomes the foundation of a more stable, functional, co-parenting dynamic, not built in moments of pressure, but in the quiet moments when you chose to think before you spoke. If there is one idea to carry from this video, let it be this: you do not owe anyone an immediate answer to a significant question. The pause is not a wall. It is not a tactic to frustrate or delay. It is simply the space between receiving a message and deciding what you want it to mean for your family. Use that space, protect it, and practice returning to it every time you feel the pull to respond before you are actually ready. Steady co-parenting is not built in moments of pressure. It is built in the quiet, deliberate choices that happen before you ever send the reply. If this felt useful, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. If you'd like more calm, grounded, practical strategies for navigating co-parenting with clarity, consider subscribing or following so new content reaches you regularly. Everything here is for the co-parent doing the quiet, steady work of getting this right.